Hello, my name is Andy Smuskiewicz, and welcome back to the next episode of the Salvation from Destruction podcast. Today, I'd like to welcome back Doug Seccombe, a retired FBI evidence response team leader, and I'd also like to welcome back Larry Rafferty, a former homicide task force commander. So today, we're going to review a cold case death that was completely picked at random. As former investigators, we're going to review this case as if we're looking at it today. We are going to share our perspectives and insights into the case, and this is in no way, shape, or form meant to criticize or judge any investigator's investigation or what they've done so far. In fact, we haven't even contacted the department that's investigating this case. The case tonight that we will be reviewing is the death of George H. Bud Sager Jr. and is currently being investigated by the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office in Texas. So just to give a little synopsis on the case, on June 7th, 1984, 30-year-old Sager withdrew money from his bank near Interstate Highway 45 and Spring Cypress Road in Spring, Texas. This was the last time that he was seen alive. On July 3rd, 1984, Sager's truck was found abandoned in a parking lot of the Crossroads Shopping Center located at 1100 West Dallas, Conroe, Texas. Foul play was suspected at the time, and Sager was never heard from again. Now, fast forward to 2010, Montgomery County Sheriff's Office cold case detectives obtained DNA from Sager's family members. The detectives uploaded Sager's DNA into a DNA database known as CODIS. In 2011, a DNA matched a skull found in Walker County on December 18, 1989, an individual picking up aluminum cans along Farm to Market 1375, approximately 9/10 of a mile west of Interstate Highway 45 in the New Waverly area, discovered the skull on the side of the road. The skull was found to contain a short handwritten note stating that an unknown individual had found the skull in the woods, but could not get involved in the case. It appeared that the author of the note had moved the skull from the woods and placed it along the shoulder of the road where it might be discovered. So if I were looking at this case, one of the first things that I would do if I was picking it up today, now we know that it happened in the 1980s, but if I was picking it up today, I would do like what my old partner Dave and I did when we started looking at our cold case homicide and ended up solving it. What I ended up doing is I ended up just taking the case itself, very basic, and I started going through the case. I started going through all the reports. I started going through all the evidence, and I started making notes. And I started organizing everything. And it took me a couple months. And I just sat down and I would just kind of start reading it like a book and organizing everything. And like I said, making my notes. And then once I got done, it took me a couple months. I handed it over to Dave, and I didn't want to influence Dave at all whatsoever. So I said, hey, take a look at this case and tell me what you think. And it took him maybe about a month to comb over everything. And then we sat down and we had a meeting, and we both came to the conclusion that it was the same person. That's how we started working that case. The one thing I want to highlight too is whenever you get going in one of these cases, and Larry, stop me if I'm wrong, and same thing with Doug, is you might have an idea who did this, but you have to let the evidence direct you. If you think it's somebody and the evidence is leading you to somebody else, you have to listen to that. So, yeah. So like I said, Larry, I'll kick it to you first. This is found on Montgomery County Sheriff website, just very vague. And I kind of wanted it that way. So, but if you were to get this case, what are some of the things that you would do right out of the gate?
Well, number one, I think it's important. It's just some facts about where he was, when he was there. When he went to the bank, did he recover? Did he take money out? How much money did he take out? Was he taking it out for a purpose? The people inside the bank, was he alone? Was somebody following him? We always talk about victimologies on these old cases. All these cold murders that I looked into and I was part of. We always looked at what the victim did. Was the victim what was his lifestyle? What was he doing? Are there things about his lifestyle that kind of led him to this, or was he completely picked from random? Did someone see him in a bank? Did someone follow him? Is this someone that had a vendetta for him and he knew who he was? Those are all the kind of things I think you first start looking at. But I think his background, what he did, what kind of lifestyle he led, who he hung with, who his friends were, where his job was, things like that. Those are the people I would go and interview as much as I could about him to know what kind of lifestyle he led. I worked a series of cold murders back from the early 70s, and they were all of a bunch of women, and lifestyles were exactly the same. They're all hitchhikers, and they were all girls who were found dead, sexually assaulted, found dead and naked, left in fields. in suburban Cook County, and happened in early 70s. But there was a series of them. We always thought there was a serial killer. Probably, I kind of figure it was maybe a truck driver kind of driving through, because there was no solid information. But one thing that we did know is they all were hitchhikers. And again, that kind of lifestyle is that's kind of a risky lifestyle. You're going to get picked up by people who don't have the greatest intentions for you. So that's one of those things, I think, with him, that I would want to look at first and see what kind of lifestyle he led.
No, definitely. And the other thing that I would do too, like you said, is start talking to the family, start talking to friends. Look at any of the witnesses in the case, anybody that is in the report. I would try to locate them. That's what we did, is we just started making a list of witnesses, people who might have known or heard something that are listed in the report. And especially in today's day and age with social media, a lot of
Sure.
times people are easier today to find than they were definitely back in the 80s. I would definitely at least start looking them up, contacting them. I personally like going to people's residences, knocking on the door. Technology is great, but I like getting out from behind the desk and just, almost catching people off guard. And as time passes, a lot of times people are become more forthcoming and they remember
Mhm.
things and they want to tell you things.
Yeah.
But from the evidence standpoint, Doug, you want to share your insight on that? Some things that you're going to start thinking about?
Well, at the bank, this is 1984, so I'm guessing there were no ATM machines like on the outside that the guy was using. I'm sure he had to go inside to make a withdrawal with a teller and so on and so forth. But even back in the 80s, not sure how things were in Texas, but here in Illinois, we had cameras in banks, but they were not video cameras. They were the
Right.
old, film cameras where you had to pull the canister out, take the film, go get it developed, and then review and hope to God they loaded it correctly. So I would be checking that right away to see what we have on camera. And if anybody in that bank just kind of glummed onto the guy, he is withdrawing quite a bit of money if he's withdrawing money for a closing.
Right.
So figure at least a few $1,000s that he's taken out. And if somebody's in the bank and hears him talking about it or is watching him, that might get their attention. And then if we can develop somebody like that inside the bank, I would start fingerprinting where that person was. But what we don't know is how soon did they find out this information he's missing and then go back to the bank. I mean, did the cleaning crew come in like 4 or 5 times and, clean the counters and clean the windows and everything else? So that would be my first thing, is looking at the bank. And then obviously the second part of the story here is the car once it's found.
So what are some things that you would start looking for in the car? Like if we were able to look at the car, let's just say we could wave a magic wand and go back in time and start looking at the car. Or if for some reason the car is preserved, I don't think that maybe it would be, but if it is, what are some things that you would look at?
Sure. In this case, his car is found at a strip mall
Yeah.
away from the bank. And I would immediately start looking for any evidence on the ground. You never know what these bad guys might drop. So if we're around the car and say our victim's not a smoker and we've got cigarette butts, that like relatively fresh, I would obviously be collecting those for DNA as well as fingerprints. Anything on the outside of that car looks like that it could be evidence of somebody who kidnapped this guy, so to speak. Now that I've got the car, I'm going to take it to a controlled environment. I'm going to put it on a flatbed. I'm going to tow it back to either the police station or my office, the FBI office, and work on the car there and start off with just 360 photography all around that car. Start taking notes about what looks like potential evidence on the outside. If there's dirt in the wheel wells, there's dirt on the tires, that could mean that they took this guy's car somewhere
Yeah.
to get rid of the body. And now I got to start thinking about collecting soil samples. Um, Once I do the outside of the car, we'll open the doors and we'll take some more photographs. And then I'll send in people, dressed up in the funny suits with the hairnets and the tie back, the gloves and the booties and all that. And their job is to get that trace evidence. And so in the FBI, we vacuum trace evidence that go into special filters, but a lot of the state labs around the country like to use tape. Either way, we'll do it, however it gets done. We'll get that trace evidence first. I'm looking for hairs, fibers. I'm trying to put somebody in that car that shouldn't have been in that car. And so looking for the trace evidence. Then we're going to start pulling items out of the car And what I usually do is I lay down brown butcher paper somewhere near the car, and we divide the car up into sections. So section 1 would be the front driver's seat. Section 2 would be the front passenger seat. 3 is behind the front passenger. 4 is the rear seat behind the driver. 5 is the trunk, and then 6 is the engine bay. And then we usually just call the center console the center console. And so we start pulling everything out of there and laying it out. And sometimes, the investigators, you guys, if you're interviewing the family members and other folks, there may be something in there that's his, but there may be something in there that's not his. And so a lot of obvious things would be like, say there's a water bottle sitting in the, on the floor in the front driver's seat. Well, that's got fingerprints and DNA all over it. So that's getting collected. That's going to get probably super glued to preserve the prints. We're going to swab it obviously first to get the DNA, but we're looking for things that are not the victims. And then hopefully the investigators can come back and tell us what to keep and what to put back in the car. And then after we do the trace evidence, now we're getting into collecting DNA and collecting fingerprints. Fingerprints is usually the last thing we're going to do. So in the meantime, I'm looking for areas to swab that could have the victim's DNA as well as anyone else that's in there. Obviously, he may have put family members in the car at some point. You guys, the investigators, would have to go out and get DNA samples from the family members so we can eliminate them. And then that trunk would also be, was his a vehicle or was his a pickup truck?
No, it was a pickup truck.
It was a pickup truck. I don't know if it has a cover on the back or they could have used a tarp or something. They may have put the body in the back. And so it'd be interesting to see if there's any of his DNA in the back of that truck, especially blood. We find his blood in the back of the truck, we're rocking and rolling at that point. But the main thing is to try and find evidence of somebody else in that car that doesn't belong there. And then fingerprinting would be the last thing we do. Obviously, we're going to print the outside, but we're really going to go to town on the inside and fingerprint in there. And because it's really hard for somebody to explain why their fingerprints are in the inside of the car versus the outside of the car. So once we collect all that, then we have to get it off to the respective labs to get it analyzed.
So even after all these years, and let's just say, and again, we know nothing about this case other than what was on their website. If the vehicle, let's just say, was stored outside, can you still find trace evidence, even if it was outside and even after all of these years? Is it possible to still find trace evidence?
Sure. Most of it would be on the inside, but you might still get lucky and find some on the outside. The FBI's had cases where there were 3 girls that went missing in Virginia as well as South Carolina, and it was the same killer, and I can't think of his name right now, but he drove a Ford Taurus, and one of the girls' fingerprints was on the inside of the trunk lid on that car, but she went missing 5 years prior to finding that car. Unless you wipe a fingerprint off, it's pretty solid. It's going to stay there.
I say one thing that Doug said, and this is one thing that Andy, it was funny because we were talking about it just before we all got on, and Andy just said how hot it is. Now, it's June in Texas. That's number one to me. Number two, the offender had to drive the car because the car was moved from its original position to the other town that's down the street where it was recovered a few miles away. It's like, I think it's 22, 23 miles away from where it was discovered. That to me, and then think about this, guys. One thing that if I'm that guy, the first thing I'm thinking is that skull didn't come up until a certain amount of time. I mean, it's been 20 some years. I'm sorry. No, it's not been that long. It's been a few years till the skull comes up. But my guess is they dug a hole and put that guy in a hole. They put the victim in a hole somewhere. They buried him. And for that skull to pop up the way it did and the rest of the body not showing up. So that also tells me that whoever did this was digging and doing manual labor and then getting back into that truck. Mm-hmm. So I agree with Doug. There's got to be sweat. There's got to be something in there. As if it's 100 degrees out and you're digging a hole in the middle of anywhere. Maybe they had some concealment. It was easy for them to do it, but Doug said it. They had the body in the back of the truck, but they also had to dig a hole to put that body in a hole, right? Because the rest of the body's never been recovered as far as we know. So my guess is the body's buried somewhere out there, and the only thing they found was the animals digging up the skull. is probably what happened. And that's how the skull ended up coming up. That being said, again, the heat, Texas in June, it's 100 degrees down there. Andy, you can tell us that. So it's 100 degrees down there. If I'm out digging a hole in this weather that we're having right now, Doug, you and I both know if I'm in my backyard digging a hole, I'm coming back in soaking wet. So if you don't think that these guys got in that truck, or maybe a single guy got in that truck and he didn't sweat all over that headrest, all over that steering wheel, all over those seats, he got shorts on, I would look at the back of the legs, like Doug was saying, back of the legs at the seat, that the seat's sweating against the legs. I would cut that material out and set it for DNA. That's what I would do. Doug, you agree?
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, when we collect DNA, it's either swabbing. We swab a ton of headrests. We do the seat that the person's sitting in, the steering wheels, anything that they can touch. Now, we also got to be careful. It's like DNA versus fingerprints.
Sure.
So, some things will not get swabbed because we don't want to destroy the fingerprint. But a lot of things will get swabbed, like seat belts, especially when it's going around your neck like this. You're leaving skin all over those seat belts. But the buckle, I'm going to fingerprint that buckle before I swab it. If I can see a fingerprint on there, which 9 times out of 10 I do.
Yeah.
But the other thing Larry mentioned too that's important is that they're out in the woods somewhere burying this body. Not only are they bringing dirt back to the car, but they're bringing plant material back to the car.
Sure.
And so in a lot of cases, you can get a forensic botanist on the case and say, hey, this is the plant material we pulled out of this car. What is it and where's it from? And that's what they're really good at telling you, is that this is, they give you the scientific name, and then, next thing you know, they're going to tell you where this is located, within the state of Texas and places like that. So now back in the 80s, we didn't have the benefit of the geological study that's been done since then, where the FBI and the U.S. Department of Geology get together, as I spoke about before. And we
talk about that again. Talk about, because I know you talked about it, during the AJ Friend episode. But if you could talk about that again, because I found that to be very interesting. I had no idea that you guys had that.
Yeah, the U.S. Geological Survey, that organization, as well as the Department of Agriculture, did a nationwide study where they took soil samples from every single county in the United States.
That's
and
crazy.
All that information is on file. And obviously, Department of Agriculture uses it for agricultural reasons, in terms of what to plant and everything else. I'm not sure what the U.S. Geological Survey is using that for, but it's nice to have that information for things they get involved in. And then the FBI is like, hey, if we send you a soil sample, can you tell us where it's from? And they're like, yeah, pretty much. And they've done that in cases. And the AJ case, it just so happened to be in McHenry County where, he lived.
And where you were.
Yeah. So that. But I talked about that other case where the guy drove from New Hampshire to California. They got the car in California, took the dirt out. It comes back to the county wherever Toledo, Ohio is. And that's where they found the kids.
Right.
It's not 100% accurate all the time, but a lot of times it gets you a lead that you didn't have.
You know what? You just said it, Doug. It puts you on the trail. I mean, there's no chance that it's going to put you on the trail. Absolutely.
And you can do that in this case in Texas. So it'd be the dirt as well as the plant material that can get you in the right area. We had a case here one time. Tracy Todd, who was a flight attendant, went missing. She was in one of these forest preserves down near like 135th Street in the Dan Ryan. Yep. And we took plant material samples out of the suspect's vehicle and they were tested. Now it was a common grass that's all over Cook County. But the grass that we found in his truck had a high concentration of methane gas in it. Well, wouldn't you know, there was a landfill right across the highway from where her body was found, just kicking out methane after methane.
Wow.
So they had us collect that same type of grass sample going like 4 miles west of the location. So every time we collected a sample, the concentration of methane got lower, lower, and lower.
Wow.
But right up next to that landfill was a high concentration. Great circumstantial evidence. Doesn't mean he buried a body there, but it's like, why does your truck have this grass?
No, but again, you just said it. It's a start. It's a start to a case you may not have a start to. They have nowhere to go. Like something like this. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, Andy, you said it best. And we're not here to critique people. And critique what they did. But there's stuff here that Doug's talking about that there's shitloads of detectives all over this country that don't know what Doug just said. And I saw it on your last episode and I nearly shit. I was like, damn, I didn't know that. And that's
Right.
phenomenal information. I mean, especially, and you know this, Doug, all the forest preserve bodies that we get every
Yeah.
year, and all the old murders that I worked were all dump jobs in the woods and things like that. And again, it's difficult in a case like this, but Andy, you said it. The best thing that you could find is that they still had that pickup truck somewhere in evidence.
Right.
And if they don't, I mean, and again, back then, I don't believe anybody had to hold stuff like that. But it is their only link to the offender in my eyes. I
Right.
mean, that's the only thing that connects. If there's something in that truck, and I agree with Doug, I mean, maybe have the right people go through that truck. I mean, with the different kind of mindset, and just from what Doug was talking about. And I mean, that I think that truck is you know, that, and the big thing for me is 45.
Mhm.
When I read this thing, the 45 kept pounding me in the head, because I kept saying to myself, all these little towns I'm looking at, Conroe, Spring, and then where he was, where the skull was located in
Yeah.
New
Yeah.
Waverly. I mean,
Excellent.
those three towns run along right along 45, and
Yeah.
they're all
Yeah.
big towns
New
now.
Waverly.
They're all growing
Yep.
up in big towns, but one of the first thing I would have done back then is look at the parolees, see if there's any kind of a,
Yep.
this is it a robbery? Yeah, very well could have been, but a robbery that turned into a murder, or was it
Mhm.
someone who had a vendetta against him? And those are the things you have to kind of clear out, and your investigation should tell you at least something. And again, when you can't dispute something and say, well, listen, we don't believe it's that, then maybe it's something else.
Right.
But I would look at all kinds of similar crimes. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
anything that where it
Yep.
came even close to this, this type of, because it's basically it's an abduction, kidnapping, armed robbery. But maybe he fought, maybe they grabbed him in a parking lot, maybe they didn't get him in a parking lot, maybe he left the bank, and in where he ended up next was where he got abducted. We don't know that. I mean, all we know is, or did they grab in the parking lot of the bank, stick a gun in his face, and tell him drive? And they took him out there, ended up shooting and killing him, and took his money. And they figured we're going to bury him and ditch his body. And then they left the truck in another town.
Mhm.
But again,
Yeah.
five to me, those three towns, I would be looking at parolees. I'd be looking at all those things. I'd be looking at similar type cases, similar type years back, years afterwards. I would look at cases that appeared 5, 10, 15 years later, see if there's any similar MO. The penitentiaries, I would be digging into those penitentiaries and finding out who was locked up maybe prior, or maybe got locked up afterwards, that type of thing.
Yeah, I would
Especially with,
definitely even network, reach out to other departments, other counties, and say, hey, have you had anything similar, any similar crimes, any armed robberies around that time
yeah,
too, as well. And again, it goes back to that victimology. Did
yep,
he have a high risk lifestyle too? Who
yep,
was he hanging with? And that comes from his old, his family, his old associates.
mhm,
Maybe he has something in his background that we don't know about that's not in the flyer, and start working that avenue as well. But and even
yeah,
to
for sure.
backtrack a little bit, Doug, about the video in the bank.
Yeah.
Let's just say that there is video sitting in evidence somewhere. Does the FBI have the capability to maybe look at, like, maybe old VHS, even back then? Do they have a capability to look at that technology still?
Yes, they have a unit in the lab called the Forensic Audio Video Unit. They just call it FAVU. And you can, and the other thing too, now a lot of the technology and training that FAVU has back at the lab is available at the regional computer forensics labs around the country. There's one in Chicago. Almost, I know there's got to be one in Houston. And so you can send it there, they can enhance it, or they can send it to the FBI lab and they can enhance it. And if we can't do it, we'll go to a private vendor and see if they can enhance it. So I've seen that on cases in the past.
Got
But
it.
it's not like what you see on TV, obviously, when you watch those stupid FBI shows and all of a sudden the guy hits two buttons on his keyboard and you got a bird's eye view of, the license plate. That doesn't happen.
No, right,
Yeah,
right.
but
I
Very
wish it
seldom.
did. Well, would you do anything with the skull? Would you do anything
well,
with that?
that's an interesting scene too, because based on what I read, everyone thinks that the skull is found close to where the body is buried, and I gotta assume that's already been searched. But on something like that, you could bring in a good cadaver dog, and we talked about that. There's good ones and there's bad ones, and you got to get a good one, and you'll get a good one if you call the FBI and have them. They've got the list of the best cadaver dog operators in the country, and you could send one down to that area. But that's the only place you can start is near it was found on the side of the road.
Yeah. And that's why what Doug talked about with soil, that's why that turns up that, if there's soil inside the floorboard of that car, is there soil on the truck tires? I mean, obviously now all these years later, it's going to be washed off regardless of where they kept it, but you just don't know. But that's when a floorboard is so important, because again, we know that that truck got moved from wherever it was found and where he was last seen. We know they were in that truck. You know that the bad guy was in that truck. So there's your only link to the bad guy is that truck. So that truck is still important. Hope to God they have it.
I would bring out some good cadaver dogs.
Oh yeah,
and at least start where the skull was found. It based on what they're saying in the article, it's almost like you have the road, and then there's probably some woods not that far off the road, and would start there, let the dogs do their thing. I was thinking about would a bloodhound work in this case for human scent, and get Passetti on the line, but I got a feeling he's going to say no because the human scent is gone because it's a skull. It's no longer giving off human scent; it's giving off decomposition.
Right.
So bloodhounds don't work on decomp, but it would trail the person that brought the skull to the police, his scent's on that skull, but I don't think you're going to be able to pull scent from the people that buried the body at that point. So this is a strict cadaver case. So bring in the cadaver dogs and let them do their thing. And there's been technology out there where you can attach these devices to airplanes and helicopters, and they're searching for calcium. So what they do is they fly over an area and turn this thing on, and if it hits a deposit of calcium, they'll take a GPS reading right then and there. You'll tell your guys on the ground, put this waypoint in your GPS, go to it. It could be a dead deer or a dead dog, but it could be a human body too.
Well, especially if you know the area, like you said, Doug. You were starting from the area where the skull was found.
It's got to be a surface dump. It can't be a buried body. But go in there with some cadaver dogs and see if you can find the rest of this guy.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm sure they did some sort of a grid search. That's my.
I
would think they would have looked out there. I don't think they would have walked away. And again, I've worked plenty of, just like Doug, I've worked plenty of buried body cases, and in an interesting one that we found that washed up on out in Lamont, and the watershed ran down a hill, and Dr. Clyde Snow came out, and we both laughed when
old Dr. Cigarettes.
Cigarettes and a pipe. He was setting himself on fire with a pipe. But that was a interesting case because the water kind of shed down and it revealed the body. It was buried. Yeah. The body had been buried since the 70s. And just from the clothing, as soon as we got the clothing out and we started looking at the bones were wrapped in the clothing, and the clothing was from the 70s. And it was kind of a sad story, but we ended up, it was a homicide. The body was buried, and the offender had died 2 years prior to us finding the body. And, but it was good because we gave the family some sort of, hey, we found your son who's been missing for 40 years. But it was an interesting case just again, because of the way the body washed away. We never found the skull. We found the rest of the bones, but we never found the skull, and not all the bones, but the skull. Our assumption is that an animal, they start playing, they start moving stuff around, and before you know it, that skull's 300 yards away and it's buried again, because of some mud or whatever, and it's never found. Fortunately, like this, I mean, maybe for whatever reason, maybe the skull was sticking up a little bit, and again, finally washed up, and then the animals start, For me, I would look and see, obviously you want to know if the skull's cracked at all. If it looks like there's a gunshot through the skull to know whether he was shot in the head or not. It may not very well be at all. There may be no damage to the skull at all, but that's kind of the thing you're looking for. Blunt force trauma, somebody hit somebody in the head, you can have a crack. In the skull, you're going to be looking for that, or the same with a gunshot. Again, stabbing, you're never going to know. You're never going to know he was stabbed,
I read an article on this case, and they did examine a skull at the medical examiner's office there in Harris County, and they couldn't determine a cause of death.
Okay, there you go.
Based on the skull. So
yeah.
But this almost sounds like it was just a dump on the surface, or they buried it. And typically, people don't bury a body deep enough.
No.
And they throw dirt on it, thinking, he's gone. No one's going to find it. Animals will find that within hours.
Right. And as you know, blowflies and animals will be there within seconds. So
they will dig that thing up as fast as you put it in there.
Yep.
And like you said in the AJ episode, is when people start digging holes, that's hard work. Even
Yeah.
if I'm in my yard digging for a half hour, I'm exhausted.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, so they're not going to go deep at all. If, like you said, just throw it on the surface and just cover it with some dirt.
Yeah.
You know. But the other thing too that I would want to do in this case is, again, go back over the reports. And for me, and where we were successful with our cold case was just combing over those reports time and time again and finding witnesses. Like I would go back to the bank or see if they talked to anybody at the bank at that time. And I would try to find those people. Maybe he came in with somebody. If they don't have video, maybe they could go, oh, yeah, I kind of remember that guy. He used to be a regular here. And, you know, that one particular day he came in and he was with somebody new. Maybe they could do a composite sketch. The one thing I was surprised about was, even in our case, was what people remembered 12 years later. And the things that they told us, it was almost like time went on and they actually felt more comfortable talking about it. And they were a wealth of knowledge and they told us a bunch of information that was nowhere in their reports that we didn't know. And the one question that we would ask everybody at the end of our conversation, at the end of our interview, even if it was a casual interview sitting in their living room, was, if you were us, who would you talk to next? And then that led us to our main witness in our murder, because they're like, I don't know, but you might want to talk to this person. So we're like, okay. So then we go and we track her down. She was nowhere in the reports. Nobody ever talked to her. No fault of anybody. It was just nobody knew about her. We went and knocked on her door and she's like, oh, I remember everything about it. And she actually heard our offender confess to the murder to her deceased boyfriend. So you never know what someone's going to tell you. So I would actually find all the witnesses in the report, try to track them down, rule them out. Not that they did anything, but you'd be surprised what people tell you after all the time. And then especially the people at the bank, you know, if they're still around, if they're still local, you know, again, now with technology, you know, we have this technology, you know, with Skype and, you know, talk to them. You never know what they're going to tell you. They might tell you something that blows it wide open. So
To your point, Andy, think about it. What if it was an inside job at the bank?
yeah.
What if that teller
I was
knew
thinking that
somebody?
too.
What if that teller knew somebody? And I know Doug's coming in every day, and Doug comes in and withdraws a couple $1,000 or a couple. And I knew Doug came in 2 weeks ago, said he's closing on a house or whatever, and Doug's going to
Right.
come in a couple weeks and withdraw money. And I call my friend and I say, hey, listen, Doug's going to be walking out of here anytime now. You know, and did those situations change? And that's one thing that I found with cold murders is people's situations change. You know,
Mhm.
the one person was married to someone 30 years ago. Now they're not. You know, one was a close relative and now they're not. And, you know, people die off and people move on. And there's all kinds of little, like you said, Andy, there's all kinds of little spots like that where you look and you go, oh shit, this guy's situation changed. So, you know what it just did? It opened a door for me. Doug, to
Yep.
that point, I mean, you know, go back and look at the employees, you know, take a look at every employee there, see what
Yeah.
they're doing now. See what they're doing now. See if back then they had any friends or family that did jail
Mhm.
time for similar robberies or that got whacked for a robbery. How do we know there's not a teller or somebody that was in that bank that day that's got a cousin who just got out of the joint for robbery and he's going to do
Yep.
another robbery and he knows she's there and you know there's a little who knows that could have been a total setup. We don't know that you know. And
Happens all
again,
the
they
time
may have
because,
done this. We don't know. You know.
yeah, get them on the box, get them
Yeah.
polygraph.
Right.
Yep.
Right. And the other thing too is I want to talk to the person who found the skull, you know, because, you know, I know that they don't want to get involved, but I would find out who they were out there picking up cans with. Were they with somebody? Were they with a company that was picking up cans? Were they just some person just walking along the highway? You know, were they identified by, by the detectives? I would want to see that report, you know, and again, I'd still want to talk to them again. Maybe they would have a conscience and just say, hey, you know, this is someone's child. This is someone's father, maybe someone's, son.
Sure.
Where did you find it? I mean, and who knows? I mean, you know, they may actually bring you right to the point. And that skull could have been brought there by an animal, and it more than likely did. It might give you an area where you could start looking as well, a specific
Mhm.
area. So I would definitely want to get my hands on that person if I could.
I'd want
I
that note and fingerprint that note.
yeah.
Yep.
You know, back in the 80s, if you're kind of desperate and you're writing this note real fast, you're not thinking about putting gloves on,
No.
you
No.
know.
Again,
No.
to me, guys, the car. The other again, when I talked about, you look at his lifestyle. And I'll give you another scenario. And again, you don't know. Where was he the night before? Was he sitting in a tavern after work and bullshitting with some guys and telling them he's doing something tomorrow at the bank? And they thought, hey, this guy's got some money or this guy's got something. Let's go. There's only one bank in town. Let's go see let's go see if he shows
Right.
up. Well, there he is. You just don't know. You don't know who heard what. You don't know where he was before. I think all those things are important. I think what he was doing a day or two before to see if this guy, whoever did this, obviously either followed him, knew him, or was a complete stranger. Obviously, that's a very wide circumstance. But based on that, and if you think about it, hey, the night before he was here, the night before he was at home, we dissolved that. It's overdone. What we have no right. That morning he got up. Then you go back to the employees. I would flush all that stuff out. I would want to know where he was. I'd talk to family, just like you said, Andy. Go back, talk to family, flush everything out. What kind of lifestyle he had? Who was he with? Did he have a girlfriend? Is there anybody at the bank he knew? Is there any kind of connection to him and anybody at that bank? The kind of friends he had. Is there someone that knew he was taking that money out and that maybe waited in the parking lot and figured, hey, I'm going to get the money from him, and he fought and got him in the car, ended up hurting a guy, and figured, hey, I got to get rid of him, and shoots and kills him, buries him, whatever. Again,
Right.
but to me, that car, Doug, the car is huge. I think it's
Yeah.
still huge. If it's around, it's still huge.
Even the people at the closing, the people from the title company,
Mhm.
who's representing the seller, who's representing the
Sure.
buyer.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, you could call your friends all day long and go, we got a guy that's going to come in with 10 grand today. Here's
I
his
think
bank.
and I think again, I think the only thing maybe the burial site where he's buried, you'll know if he was shot or not. You know what I mean? Maybe there's a chance there's
Yeah.
a shell casing. Maybe there's a chance there's a projectile that you're going to recover in that hole. Maybe all these years later with everything I do, you're going to find DNA on that clothing. Probably not, but maybe, probably not.
Yeah.
But those are things that that's why I think that car is so important. I think his lifestyle is so important. I think that bank is so important, and I think employees at the bank are important.
Mhm.
And again, those people's lifestyles have changed. Maybe it's a teller who's dating a dirt bag, and they got a little system going where maybe she's doing robberies or something. And again, to me, the whole thing with 45. I mean, I can't get that out of my head. I look at that and 45 screams at me, and and the reason it does is just because they're 20 miles apart. There's three towns that are 20, 23, 24 miles apart. I looked it up. I went onto a map of the area there and looked at and how far those towns were apart. Whatever that guy did, and I keep saying guy because 45 was the main drag between all three places. You've got almost three different crime scenes. You got the bank, you got where the truck was recovered, and then you got where the skull was recovered. And I'm saying crime scenes, but they're not really, right? But there's three places that had to be familiar to the killer. And when
Right.
when people kill or when killers kill, this guy didn't drive from Austin or Dallas to commit this murder and rob this guy. He's a local guy. And with those three towns, he knew all those areas. He knew where to take that body. He knew where to go, where he had some sort of concealment. He's familiar with that area. He knows where he's going. He knows where he's been. He knows where to dump that truck. My guess is that truck was dumped somewhere that he's familiar with. And the other thing is where it was dumped is it close to his home because he had to walk. He
Mhm.
dumped the victim's truck. The victim's dead. He isn't dumping that truck. So the offender dumped the truck. Where did he leave it? How close is it to his home? I mean,
Right.
are we suspecting he's going to walk 23 miles to another house? Probably not.
No.
That last town where the truck was found, that may be where your offender is. Maybe that's why he drove through that town and went to, is it New Waverly? I don't remember what it was. New Waverly? Is
Yeah.
that yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Especially how hot it is. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah,
you're not going to
100%.
go for a long walk. The other thing too that I was thinking, and it could be totally far fetched. I'm kind of hung up on the person who found the skull. If you look at the pictures nowadays, that area is all built up. Okay, so but back
Mhm.
then that could have been a wooded area before everything was built up. I would try to find the property owner because a lot of people down here own land, they own property. The other thing that I would want to do is find out who owned the property where that skull was found or in the vicinity where the skull was found.
Sure.
And I would want to find out who that property owner was. And hunting's really big down here. So I would say, hey, did you give anybody permission to hunt? How do we know that he was actually picking up cans on the side of the road? He could be
Mhm.
completely lying about that. That could be actually possibly the murderer maybe feeling bad or something like that. Or, maybe the property owner gave this guy permission to hunt on his land, check DNR records, see if there are any hunting permits, to anybody back in that area, but I would want to talk to the property owner back then too, and just see if he let anybody hunt on that property, see if he was familiar with anything. Did he notice anything? Because
Yeah.
farmers down here are really big on their property. And, did he notice anything and just kind of be like, yeah, okay, whatever. It's just a pile of dirt or whatever, and
I had
maybe
a cold murder I worked from the early 70s, Andy, and it was a 16-year-old girl. Her body was in the backyard of this farm on Route 30 before Route 30 was Route 30. So you're talking 50 years ago now. And the girl's body was in the backyard. This farmer came out and saw it because his dog was out there sniffing around. It was buried in snow frozen. So he said he figured he'd wait till May to call the police. True story.
Wow.
So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She was dead there. She was stabbed to death and was thrown in this guy's backyard. He had like a 3-acre parcel of property around a big farm, and around his farm, he had a wooden picket fence, and the body was on the inside of that wood picket fence. He didn't think anything of it and figured he'd call the police when the weather warmed up because the body was frozen. So,
Wow.
I mean, you talk about weird shit, and just to your point, I mean, was that a farmer who owned that property, and did he recover that and figure I can't get involved in this? I got, whatever,
Yeah. It could be the offender, it could not be. It could be the property owner. It could be some random person picking up cans. We don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, to me, I'm kind of hung up on that as well, where it's like, you got to find that person who actually found the skull. So I was kind of hung up on that, but that was just a thought that I had in my head. Find out who that property owner is.
One thing we don't know in this case either is, how did the car end up at the second location where it was quote unquote abandoned?
Mhm.
Did our victim drive there and that's where the crime takes place? Or is he grabbed at the bank and they drive that vehicle
Right.
there?
That was my assumption, Doug, is that he was grabbed at the bank, went to that,
that's where the money
obviously
is.
the burial location or wherever they dumped him after they murdered him, and then took the car back. That's my assumption. That's kind of what I assumed.
I was shocked if the crime is committed at the bank and now the bad guys have this car for a little while, 9 times out of 10 they burn the car up.
Yeah.
They don't just leave it somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking 1984, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And maybe they felt
that was
a lot
before
more
all the
comfortable.
forensic shows.
Well, right. Well, you know what? Dolan probably felt. Oh, you're right. And blood would have been typed. There wouldn't have been DNA. We'd have typed it and said, "Oh, it's B positive."
Yeah.
Okay, big deal, right? Yeah. That's 3/4 of America.
Because I noticed that in 30 years of doing this, once some of these TV shows were on, these guys were watching them.
Smarter. Yep, smarter.
Yeah, they
made us work harder.
Yeah. I mean, we had a great murder on the northwest side of Chicago where all 5 guys wore Tyvek suits.
Yep.
Hairnets, gloves, booties, the Tyvek suits, took the victim out in the garage, tortured the living daylights out of him, and killed them, and then chopped them up, put them in different dumpsters around the city, which was, in my opinion, was pretty smart because now those dumpsters are going to different landfills based on the locations. But what they couldn't stop doing,
I think we both know who did that.
They started smoking and dropping their cigarettes.
Yeah,
and we got our DNA and we got them all.
I can tell you, I had we recovered a corpse up by the Des Plaines River. The level of the water had gone down after like May flooding, a lot of water. And went down. Guy out watching birds finds a torso. So when I get on the scene, the torso's got no arms. It's cut in half. It's an upper body with a head and skull, and the teeth are all pulled. So there's no fingerprints, there's no teeth, and no arms. The head's still there. The head's there, the torso's there, and he was cut like you would cut a steak. I shouldn't even say a steak. If you were a butcher and you ran a chunk of meat across a cutting blade, and it cut just perfect circular cut on the bone, completely right through the spine. Yeah. I remember, I think another town up north, and I can't remember the name of the town. It escapes me right now, but they found legs, and we're like, okay, that's our guy. But again, you had no teeth to look at any dental, anything with dental. Even if you had a suspect, he's got no teeth. Or not a suspect, but you had an identity of your victim. We never identified the victim. Yeah. So, our guess was it came from south of the border, and and somebody came up here to even a score, and they took him somewhere and they cut him up, and that
was it.
That was it. And again, especially if they're from south of the border, there's no way for us to identify those people. We've got no record of those people.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it so much more difficult.
That they in the event that they didn't burn the truck, is it possible that he could have been with somebody that he knew? that just
Yeah,
that
that's
he
what I'm
felt
saying about his
comfortable with.
lifestyle,
Yeah.
Andy. That's
Yeah.
why I talk about his lifestyle. That's why I talk
Yeah.
about his friends and people that know him, his family. Hey, you could go talk to the family and they may say to you, "Hey, we always thought it was Larry and Doug." They always had a problem with that guy, and they always had a problem with him. They were always following him around. They always knew he had money. They were always asking to borrow money. You know what I mean? You don't know what
Right.
people's lifestyles. So that's why it's so important to know what that person did or didn't do. Where did Bud work? What did he do for a living? Who did he have any enemies? Were the people was he complaining about stalking? I mean, we talk about that stuff happening, and I mean, Doug, I'm fascinated with those Idaho murders, and I just watched a documentary on it, and
Yeah.
Scoppers did a great job. That those guys did a great job, and I know that the FBI was involved with the local police, and I believe the state police were involved, and thank God, it was a small department, and a murder like that happens, boy, it grips the whole town, but
Yeah.
it's one of those things where you look at it and you see he had no doubt in my mind he came across one of those girls and started stalking them, and he was planning that thing for months and getting ready to do what he was
Mhm.
going to do, you know.
Mhm.
And my guess is he was there enough and watched the comings and goings, and again, where did one of them pick him up? And if you're looking at that and they didn't have DNA and they weren't able to put that together the way they did, that's where I start looking. I start looking at every one of those kids' lifestyles and where they were and where they hung out and who saw people there,
Mhm.
and what the one girl who did see him in the hallway now,
Mhm.
it's come to light that one of the girls had seen him in the hallway. Andy, you said it earlier. You do get a composite sketch, and you start going around the places these victims were, and say, who does this look like? I mean, again, if you're without the leads that they had and the ability that they had to kind of generate that thing and get moving on it as quickly as they did, I would imagine the first few days of that case, though, they were going, oh shit, like
Right.
all of us do. Those guys are no different than any of us. They're looking at that thing going, oh, son of a bitch, why us? Right.
Right.
Horrible, horrible crime scene, horrible, the three, young kids in the prime of their lives getting stuffed out like that. I mean, that's the kind of crime all of us as detectives and what we do. And this is why we do it. We talk about that all the time, Andy. This is why we did
Mhm.
this shit, is to get the bad
Mhm.
guy. And even in a case like this, though, but I think, I got away from our point, but the fact to me is I'm looking at everything that he's been doing, where he's been the last few days, who he's been with, who he's been talking to. Do they know he's going to withdraw money? Does someone overhear him in a bar? Someone overhear him at work? Does someone overhear him? A friend? Is he got a neighbor who overheard him and they waited for him in a parking lot and he thought, oh shit, this is some sort of joke. This guy's now sticking me up, trying to take my money.
Mhm.
And next thing you know, this gets taken too far. They're just going to stick him up, but now they got to kill him. Is it one person? Is it two person? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Being a pickup truck, my guess is maybe two, but that's about all you're going to get.
Right.
But again, I told you guys, to me, anybody that lives in that area, I would go through those towns like anybody's business and start looking at parolees and people who had similar crimes
Mhm.
prior, similar crimes afterwards. I'd look at every suspicious person, suspicious circumstance report, attempt kidnappings, shit like that. I would look at all that stuff. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, that's where I would start if it was me.
Right.
I gotta believe that killer's in one of those three towns. I really do. And now I looked it up. They're all big towns now. Some of
Mhm.
those towns got 125,000 people in them. That changed your
Right.
whole dynamic now. But again, you're looking
Yeah.
for people that were there 40 years ago. And that's
Right.
still, to me, that's still so important.
It is.
But
One of the things you talked about earlier, Andy, was, um, we got that truck in a parking lot at a different location now. Gosh, if we could just get out there fast enough with the bloodhounds at that point,
yeah,
because if somebody left that truck there and walked away, like
hmm
Larry was saying, he might live in the area.
yep,
Those dogs are going to get that scent and go
Right.
and just start like following him. And if the dog stops, I mean, these dogs have literally gone up to the front doors of people's houses,
yep,
like, "Hey, idiots, he's in there."
Right. Right.
yep,
You
Right.
know,
yep, yep.
but you got that 48-hour, 72-hour window you got to work with,
Yeah.
for these
I,
dogs to get a good trail.
yeah.
And even if
No.
it rains, that doesn't matter either. So,
Right. Which is
yeah,
amazing to me.
yeah,
How
No,
good those dogs
yeah,
are.
they're incredible. They're incredible.
And the other thing too is, don't be afraid, any agency that's working one of these cold cases, don't be afraid to ask other agencies for advice, like the FBI. If you have a well-versed team or a well-versed person who's really good at investigating murders or cold cases, reach out to them. Share your information, brainstorm with other detectives, get a prosecutor on board too, because I'm lucky we had Bill Merritt with us the entire time during our cold case, because it was like having another partner, and B, he guided us as well as what he was going to need for the prosecution of the case. So especially when we got rolling with the case, I loved having Bill there. Is actually like having like a third partner, because he'd be standing behind us, and he was there, so he was very familiar with the case. But also too, we came and talked to you, Larry, a couple times, just saying, hey, do we have all of our ducks in a row? What do you think? Those brainstorming moments were, and even like this, just bouncing things off of each other, there's no shame in that. And at the end of the day, it's about catching that bad guy. So, you might think of something that I don't, and vice versa. And then before you know it, you start seeing the light bulbs going on, and then one thing leads to another, and hopefully you can get it across the finish line.
No,
Yeah. We'd love to find where that body was originally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with Doug on that one,
Get in there with some metal detectors and some other tools of the trade and see what we can find.
The funny thing to me too is they're still calling it a missing person. So I don't know if they know motive. And I might be wrong. They may know exactly what happened. Obviously, they're not going to tell anyone, but they're still leaving it out there as a missing person, that he was a missing person, and now they're saying foul play. Maybe that's how they classify things down south. I don't know. That's not how we would have. He may have been a missing person until he was recovered. Then it would have been a homicide investigation up here. You know what I mean? We all, it would have been classified differently. They've left us a missing person, which tells me maybe they don't know motive, Doug. Maybe they don't have a motive on it. Maybe because of the skull not having any physical injuries to the skull or any cracks or bullet wounds or anything like that, they can't call it what they want to call it. But again, he obviously the truck moved itself. So if he was last seen in, I think it was Conroe, right? Andy, Conroe, Texas, and then it ends up in Spring. To bounce around the way it did and the truck being moved, to me that the killer had the truck. And again, when you look at, I wrote some notes down and I was reading some stuff on, where did I do it here?
The bank was in Spring, and then he was found, or the truck was found in Conroe.
Right, and then New Waverly, which is 34 miles away, Doug, that's where it was.
Yeah.
Anything that you ever look into, I'd say serial killer just because of the way it was done. This may have been a serial killer in the making, and he only killed one time, and after that one time, he went dormant. You don't know. Could this have been a guy, or could this just be, again, somebody waiting for a guy that they knew had some money and they were going to rob him and dump his body, and those guys got away with it all these years. But again, it's still a crime of opportunity, and somebody either knew he was getting that money or was sitting in that parking lot and watched him take that money, was in that bank with him and watched him take that money, or had knowledge of that. I got to believe that guy's from the area. Nobody drives from where we live all the way down by you, Andy, to go to a bank and sit and wait for a guy to withdraw some money. We can do that anywhere. It's got to be a local guy. In my mind, it's a local guy somewhere. And again, I pound those penitentiaries. Who got locked up prior? Who got locked up after? Similar crimes. I would pull any case report I could. With, again, similar type missing persons if there are, similar just circumstances. Because again, if they never went missing and nobody ever, nobody disappeared, nobody was murdered, and there aren't bodies popping up all over the place. Maybe it's a one-time thing. So I'd look at robberies. You know what I mean? That type of robberies with the same MO in all three of those towns. Because again, 45 links them all. And people that do these things, they don't go far. They don't go far.
Right. So no, agreed. So again, I just wanted to thank you, Doug. I wanted to thank you, Larry, for being on the show again. Hopefully, this helps somebody. And if anybody has any information on this case, please reach out to the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office in Texas. The phone number there is 936-760-5820. That's the cold case detective unit. Once again, it's 936-760-5820. Once again, gentlemen, thank you again.
Thanks, Andy.
More than welcome.